The vastness of the world's oceans is an economic illusion. While the water seems infinite, nearly 90% of global trade is forced to navigate a fragile network of narrow geographical choke points. We engineered man-made shortcuts like the Suez and Panama Canals to handle the massive weight of global commerce. These narrow strips of water serve as essential transit corridors for millions of tons of consumer goods every year. But the single most critical vulnerability in this entire network is a natural passage in the Middle East that surpasses every other canal in strategic importance: the Strait of Hormuz. This map shows why. Every day, between 17 and 20 million barrels of oil, roughly 20% of the world's daily supply, pass through this single exit. It simultaneously handles 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas, or LNG. Blocking this 33-kilometer stretch of water triggers an immediate collapse of the global energy supply. Recent geopolitical tensions have already compromised the safety of this route. It has shifted from an open maritime highway into a heavily monitored military checkpoint, where commercial vessels often find themselves caught in the middle of local standoffs. A total closure would be felt instantly at the pump. This chart shows how crude oil prices, which typically sit between $70 and $80, would likely spike to catastrophic levels of $150 to $200 per barrel. We have analyzed this risk for decades, yet despite the obvious danger, the modern world remains functionally powerless to bypass it. The true danger of Hormuz lies in the mathematical reality that humanity has no viable backup plan. Geography creates a deceptive sense of scale. While the strait is technically 33 kilometers wide, depth restricts supertankers to shipping lanes just 2 to 3 kilometers wide. Thousands of massive tankers are funneled through this tiny corridor under constant control, leaving zero room for error. Saudi Arabia and the UAE attempted to mitigate this by building land-based pipelines. These are massive infrastructure projects designed to pump oil directly to ports outside the Persian Gulf, bypassing the strait entirely. This chart shows why those pipelines are mathematically insufficient. While the world requires 20 million barrels a day from this region, the bypass pipelines can only handle about 3 million. They cannot replace the volume lost if the strait closes. This creates an extreme vulnerability for importing nations. India, for example, imports 90% of its crude oil and holds only 20 to 25 days of emergency reserves. There is no building a detour for 20 million barrels of daily oil. If Hormuz closes, global energy reserves will likely be exhausted in weeks. The standard solution to maritime threats is military force. If the strait is blocked, why can't global superpowers simply send their navies to force the passage open? The geography is a tactical trap. 8 major strategic islands surround the shipping lane, and 7 are firmly under Iranian control. Armed with anti-ship missiles, they act as unsinkable fortresses, keeping the narrow corridor held at gunpoint from multiple angles. This environment favors asymmetric warfare. Small, heavily armed speedboats can launch from these islands to swarm aggressively around slow-moving supertankers, making it nearly impossible for a traditional navy to provide total protection. A local force doesn't need to win a conventional naval war to destroy the global economy. They just need to use their geographic high ground to flip the off switch on energy exports. Geopolitical strategy eventually filters down to the individual. A conflict thousands of miles away has an immediate impact on the lives of everyday citizens. Tension in Hormuz directly spikes the price of essential household fuels. For millions of households, this translates into higher costs for LPG cylinders used for daily cooking. We are seeing the early symptoms of this disruption. India recently faced price hikes of 112 rupees for commercial gas and 60 rupees for domestic gas, a direct result of instability in the Gulf. The chain reaction is relentless. High oil prices drive up fuel costs at the station, which inflates the cost of manufacturing every consumer good and shipping it to your door. Military standoffs in the Strait of Hormuz directly dictate the price of a daily commute or the cost of a home-cooked meal. Given the stakes, some argue that a conflict in this tiny strait could be the spark for World War III. However, a full-scale war in the Gulf creates a state of mutual economic destruction. A sustained blockade would cripple the economies of every major power involved, regardless of their military strength. The shared fear of total economic collapse is currently the strongest force keeping diplomacy ahead of open warfare. Every nation knows it cannot survive the financial fallout of a closed strait. This 33-kilometer stretch of water serves as the central pressure point for the global economy. If flow through this choke point ceases, nations like India lose 40% of their crude supply, exhausting strategic reserves in less than a month. Without energy from Hormuz, the global economy faces a choice between a total halt or an immediate catastrophic contraction.